Hello, everyone. Alyssa here, holding some curly willow. This is something we have begun using as a base for our bridal bouquets, or any bouquet you want to make in a light and airy way. We basically just wrap it onto itself, creating a little ball, or however big of a ball that you need for your bouquet. It'll take a little trial and error for you to learn what works best for you. But you basically are going to create a little nest. It's going to feel a little messy, but you will have seen in our previous videos, let's see, I believe it's called Garden Bouquet or Garden Bridal Bouquet, that we were using chicken wire. And that is a really easy method, but I did not like the idea that the bouquet had a big piece of non-compostable waste in it. So I much would rather the bouquet be something that can just rot on the earth and not leave any trash behind. So we started using curly willow. We basically create an oval and then we start wrapping it the other way so it creates like a crisscross. And then we use twine to kind of keep it all together and keep it secure. You can also wrap it in a way that you don't need much twine, but just for video purposes, I wanted you to just see the idea and be kind of quick about it. So just be sure that you are keeping in mind how big of a bouquet that you need to make. If it's going to be really small, you're going to need very little of this. This is a larger, we'll call it a curly willow nest. It's a larger nest for your flowers, so it's going to require more blooms to cover it, and therefore the bouquet is going to be bigger. So if you want it to be smaller, definitely make a smaller bunch, smaller nest. Curly willow is really widely available, so I really like using it. It's also really cheap or cost effective. If you've watched our communication with clients video, we avoid the word cheap. And we definitely get the baby curly willow, the tinier pieces that are really flexible. You'll want to avoid the older curly willow that's huge. It has a lot less flexibility to it. So these are the really young branches. There you have it. Hi again. Getting started. So once you have this base, you're going to start placing your focal blooms. What we have here are some insanely expensive ranunculus called Charlotte ranunculus. They're out of Japan and they're not very practical in any way. They don't do well in bouquets and they're like $5 a stem wholesale. So I just thought they would be pretty on the video for us to look at, but I would not recommend using these in a bridal bouquet for your clients. But they're obviously a focal flower. So because they're larger, a focal flower means it's a larger bouquet or it's a larger bloom that your eyes are going to gravitate to the quickest when you're kind of scoping out an arrangement or a bouquet. So the larger the flower, that's what your eye is going to see first. So we want to make sure that those flowers are in the best placement. They're not creating a line. They're not creating, something that looks like like eyeballs. They need to be on different planes, meaning depths, and they need to be at different heights. So it's kind of a puzzle. So I always place my focal blooms first, and I tend to start with all one type of focal bloom and then move on to the next type of focal bloom. I don't alternate much, but you can figure out what works best for you. Also, it does tend to get trickier when you're using flat flowers like this. These are large and they're flat. So they're creating a lot of flat spaces that can determine the overall shape and feel of your bouquet. They're creating a lot of, you kind of have to just be careful that you're not creating something super flat if all of your flowers are kind of plate shaped like this. So as I'm designing, I'm looking at the overall composition of the focal flowers, making sure I'm not creating any weird lines or hard, drastic shapes. I want it to feel random and I don't want it to be symmetrical in any way. I am using the screen of the video camera as my mirror here, but I would highly recommend 100% you need to design in front of a mirror. Don't hold your hand out and look at it from there. You need to just hold the bouquet where the bride or the client would be holding it and design it while you're looking at the mirror. Don't design it while you're looking straight down into the bouquet. And this will show you how it will be held, how it will kind of flow against the client's body, and the size of it against a person's body. All kinds of things. It's very informative if you are looking in a mirror. So don't you even dare try to do this without a mirror. So as you can see, I am placing blooms really close to the nest of curly willow. Some of the flowers just have to be against it. They can't all be floating high above it or it will start looking odd, like a science experiment. So you do need to choose to put some blooms right on top of the nest. And I like to make sure they're on the smaller side. If they were something like the Charlotte ranunculus, these huge flowers, then you are losing a huge amount of surface space on the nest to utilize it to hold blooms. So you would basically be covering up the whole thing and you wouldn't be able to have any flowers coming out of that area, and then it would look really flat. So I try to use the smaller flowers to hide the nest and then float the larger flowers just above it. And obviously, a lot of clients want greenery. They want the blush and the white and the greenery. And in that case, I would still be designing it this way with the flowers first. And then I would add touches of greenery at the very end. And as I'm doing right here, I'm removing some thorns that I missed, because you'll find when you're using this method, thorns get really frustrating to work with. They prohibit your bloom from being, or the stem from being pushed into the nest. They get caught. And then if you ever want to move a flower, they prevent, or they make it really difficult to take that flower out. So always try to remove all of the thorns before you start working with them. So you definitely will find that using this kind of method, the flowers do start to fall in. And my advice there would just be, don't trim the stems until you've kind of reworked them. You can pull them out at the end when you reevaluate how it looks. And just make sure you have plenty of stem length there. Don't trim it too early, because as you see, as I'm adding flowers, I'm also kind of pulling flowers back out that have fallen. And that just kind of happens for a while until you either tape the stems, or you can use twine to make this fully compostable. And then you have a little bit more hold there. And then also you're going to keep adding flowers. So the kind of the way stems are intertwined, it'll get tighter and tighter and there will be less room for movement. But in the beginning, it can feel a little frustrating. Just push through, keep adding flowers, and don't worry about it looking perfect at this stage of the game. So I added quite a few focal blooms, and now I'm moving on to Lisianthus. You do have to be aware of how easily stems snap based on where you put them. So for example, Lisianthus stems snap really easily. So I'm not going to have them at the very front bottom, at a really harsh angle, because when it gets taped, when these stems get taped or bound together with twine, they tend to break. So you do have to kind of be aware of where you're placing the stems, at what angle they will be bound together. And I love using Lisianthus because they're great floater flowers. And they're also really delicate. So I almost always try to have them if they are in season, or if it's winter, if they're available. I will always try to have Lisianthus in bouquets. I think they hold up really well out of water. Well, as long as they're fresh, and especially these smaller ones. And I just love the delicate nature that they bring to the bouquet, and they're really great to fill in without making the bouquet feel bulky. So I'm pointing out there that I don't like that line of 3 roses, so I am changing it up a little. So I do make my bouquets fairly one-sided, and I let the client know how it should be held. I also indicate how it should be held by where I have it wrapped with silk around the stems to hide the mechanics. I will put just a pin, like one of the pearl-headed push pins, and tell them the push pins should be facing them. So that lets them know. And there I am pointing out another 3 flowers that I don't like how they are lining up. So I'm going to mix those up a little. But even though it's one-sided, I do want to keep placing flowers in the back because that is how your bouquet has depth. You don't want all the flowers to be only in the front because then you wouldn't have anything happening in the back. So you do have to keep adding back there, and just look how it looks in the mirror as you're holding it. You can kind of go against the shape that you've created to make it feel a little bit more random. So I love to place flowers really low on one side, like I did that yellow ranunculus, and then have a taller flower on the opposite side on the top. So that kind of brings that asymmetry. But I still like to have a taller flower on the other side so it doesn't feel like one big flat slope. So it's all about kind of making it unpredictable, feeling natural, because that is an art. It doesn't, even if you were to place stuff randomly, you're going to come up with symmetrical blooms, blooms on the same plane, blooms that, are symmetrical and look like eyeballs. It really takes some critical thinking and looking at your bouquet to figure out how to place the stems in a way that they're not creating symmetry. So like I said earlier, I would add greenery at the end. This, I guess, is a form of greenery. I liked it because it has that golden tone in it that's in the ranunculus. And then I like the ranunculus's gold yellow tone because it kind of pulls out the yellow in the large Charlotte ranunculus, which are those huge flat flowers that are the main focal flower here. They have a bit of golden undertone in them. So I'm playing off of that, and that is why the yellow ranunculus works. And I think this foliage is a nice bridge between the pale yellow in the huge Charlotte ranunculus and the bright yellow in those kind of standard dark yellow ranunculus. Without the foliage, I think that it would feel a little bit more random and it wouldn't blend as well. So I do always like to have some kind of texture similar to a foliage or a accent flower or something that's kind of bushier and softer, or even viney like clematis, but something that I can place in the bouquet and soften the longer stems that are sticking out. I don't love to see a lot of stem, but obviously I do like to have longer flowers. So that doesn't work out well. So you have to have some kind of blending foliage or oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. Filler flower like wax flower, or even though I don't love wax flower, but that's an easy thing to get a hold of. Clematis vine. I do have some clematis in here. Those are the little, they kind of look like Dr. Seuss little trees. They're the little white swirly, well, I'm sorry, I'm saying a lot. What is the word I'm trying to think of? Oh, there they are. I'm putting one in right now. They look kind of Dr. Seussy. Fibrous. That's what I was thinking. The flower is kind of looks like a fiber of some kind of fiber. It's an odd flower, but that's clematis. Something like that where you can follow along the lines of the longer stems you've left in and it softens them quite a bit. So that's what I'm doing right here. It's trying to soften the stem of that Charlotte ranunculus. And if I knew what was good for me, I would have removed those green leaves. I clearly at the time thought it worked, and I'm feeling it doesn't right now. So it is what it is. It's not awful, but I kind of wish that they weren't in there in the mix. So I'm keeping this super minimal. In this case, I would go through and I would remove some of the stems that are sticking out. And here I'm adding strapping tape. You can also, if you have a second hand, which I did not have, you can have someone hold this, or you would be holding it and you can have someone else wrap twine around, but it does take two people. It's really hard to do with just one person. And that way the whole bouquet is compostable. So this is the back of the bouquet. And then I'm showing you, this is the front. And this is the best time to kind of adjust the stems because things will fall. And once it's taped, you can add more. You can pull stems out, make them longer. But I just wouldn't fret throughout the whole design process. I would just kind of try to enjoy the process until the end. Tape it or bind it with twine, step back, take a break, put it in a bucket of water, and then revisit it. And then you have plenty of stem length still to pull things out, move things around. So you can kind of see it getting filled out and kind of coming together as a fuller shape. I'm still just honing the shape, honing the movement, making sure the blooms aren't creating any weird lines or aren't creating anything too symmetrical. Bouquet design, I mean, it takes a long time. So that is why I'd always recommend, ideally your bouquet should be at least $300. It gives you plenty of product to work with. It enables you to get paid for your time. And obviously there would be labor on top of that if this is, an event proposal, but it is definitely an art form and it's something that's really important. The bride wants it to look perfect, so it is kind of a sculpture that you're creating for the bride. I felt like that foliage was too bushy, so I got a smaller piece to kind of follow the line that those lower blooms are creating. Chopped it all off. I do really like how the curly willow, I don't feel like I have to cover it as much. Obviously, some of you, I'm not a super, well, I am particular, but when it comes to seeing mechanics, it doesn't bother me, although it would bother me more if it was chicken wire. But it doesn't really bother me to see it with the curly willow. You could just place a few more blooms if that bothered you. I would clip that bottom right branch sticking out. And I would cut the stems a lot shorter and show the bride how to hold it. I would tell her to hold it out so the stems were, kind of poking her, not actually poking her, but kind of pointed towards her instead of pointed to the ground. And as you see with the yellow ranunculus, they create a triangle. They aren't symmetrical in any way. It's really important for things that stand out, like I said, with the focal flowers. If there's a smaller flower that really stands out color-wise or brightness-wise, for example, if they're white and there aren't any other white flowers, those are the ones you really need to make sure that they aren't creating any weird eye-catching symmetries. So here I'm adding a flower in the middle because it was too flat in there. So even though I do kind of like that V shape, I still want it to feel random and I don't like it to be completely empty in the middle. I like to have some delicate flowers, unexpectedly popping up so it doesn't feel like a tight V. And that gives it kind of the more waterfall effect, but more natural. So as you can see, the left side, the flowers are hanging down further. And on the right side, they are growing upwards, taller. So it kind of has a flow for your eye to look at it, but it still feels random because there are still flowers that are taller on each side, and it doesn't feel like an exact equation. So now I'm just creating a little bit more depth by adding a few more blooms in the back. It's not empty back there. It looks very similar to the front, but I do want it to just have a little bit more depth when you're looking at the front. So you're seeing flowers in the background. So there you have it, a full bouquet garden feeling. I would take, and there you have, I would instruct the bride to hold it just like that. And obviously, I couldn't see it on the screen, but I would have removed that bottom loop of curly willow. And I would generally cut the stems as short as I could without the whole bouquet falling apart because I really don't like the look of the longer stems, and finish it off with one piece of silk, just covering the twine or the tape, whichever you choose to use. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. We're going to release some helpful kind of documents to guide you in your bouquet designing journey. And for the rest of the month, we will be talking bouquet design. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone.